Welcome everyone to our webinar on navigating BC's one window permitting process. I guess before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that CHBA BC staff and members live and work on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded homelands of hundreds of Indigenous peoples and nations across BC, each with their own unique traditions, history, and culture. I myself am grateful to be working from the ancestral and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples today, and I'm grateful to be working on their lands. So before I introduce our speakers for today, a couple of housekeeping items just to run through. This session is being recorded, and the slides, as well as the recording of the webinar, will be distributed afterwards. It is a webinar format, so throughout the presentation, if you have any questions, just feel free to put them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. And I believe we also have the ability to upvote questions. If you have any that already exist in the Q&A that you really want answered, we'll prioritize those at the end so that we can get to those first. To introduce our speakers for today, we have Megan Williams joining us. She is the Director of Tactical Solutions at the Permitting Solutions Branch within the Ministry of Walrus, Ministry of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship, and her and her team have been spearheading a lot of the work related to the one window permitting strategy, including working on the Housing Action Task Force, the Single Housing Application Service, and the Housing Navigators, and she'll go through in more detail today during her presentation. And then we also have joining us Sherilyn Hurley, who is the Senior Product Manager at the Natural Resource Information and Digital Services Division, and she leads the team that helps kind of develop the technology around the online permitting service. And she's joined us today to do a live demo of the Single Housing Application Service form. So thank you, Megan and Sherilyn, for joining us today. And with that, I think I will turn it over to Megan to share her screen. I can stop sharing here.
All right, let's see how easy this is, whether this will work, and which screen it'll share it with. So let's see.
It's always a gamble.
I get to pick. Oh, that's good. I was wondering how that worked at Facebook or in Zoom. It's been a long time since I actually worked at Zoom. Can everybody see the housing initiative?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Welcome everybody. I'm so glad to be here. I think we had hoped that we would have this particular session earlier, I think in 2023, but it just didn't happen for whatever reason. So apologize for that, but glad we could be here today. So I hope you don't mind. I have some notes over here on the screen. So if I look away, that's where I'm looking, not because I'm ignoring you. So I'll also do a land acknowledgement. I'm coming to you from the Secwepemc territory here in Kamloops today, and it is it looks like it's a beautiful day out, but I only have like an inch of like outside that I can see, and the people have pulled down the screen so I can't actually see, but it looks like it's probably sunny out there. I should say that my team is the Tactical Solutions team in the Permitting Solutions Branch with the Ministry of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship, as you heard. So the Ministry of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship was mandated to lead the transformation of permitting across the natural resource ministries. That was in our mandate letter. And so that's why you might see a lot of these initiatives that are spearheaded by the Ministry of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship, but involve all of our partner ministries across the natural resources. Yeah, so just to let you know that. And then I will also say that my team is working at the provincial level to create strategies to accelerate permits for housing, but we don't work in the day-to-day sort of focused on the housing projects or specific authorization types. So if you do have particular questions about projects or authorizations, specific questions, you know, we have enough information to be dangerous, I think our colleagues would say, but we can, of course, take your questions back to our friends across the natural resource ministries to answer them if you have questions that we can't answer here today. So with that, I will move on. So I apologize if a lot of you have seen this presentation many times before. I will try and vary it a little bit, and you won't have seen the sort of the live demonstration of the single application form. So I'm excited to show you that today. This is a little bit of the agenda that we're going to talk about today. So the housing engagement, a little bit about what the Premier has asked us to do. I'll go through those various strategies that we're working on. We'll do a live demonstration of the single application form, and then I'll show you a little bit of the data that we're working with just for information, and then tell you about what we hope to achieve over the next year. So first of all, I'll say that there was definitely a concern out there when the latest, when Premier Eby came into the premiership. And the three things that he identified for us to focus on in the Natural Resource Ministries is the Housing Action Task Force, the single window for housing, and the single housing application. So those are the three announcements that he made in January of 2023. This was addressing the concern that it was actually the natural resource permitting that was holding up housing projects across the province. So these are the things that he charged us with and the things that he hoped that Walrus would actually lead. To that end, we also did in the Natural Resource Ministries an engagement across a provincial scan of home builders, including the Urban Development Institute, the Canadian Home Builders Association, BC Housing, Aboriginal housing associations, to understand what was it about Natural Resource Ministry permitting that was causing the concerns and the issues across the industry. So pretty consistently, this is what we've heard. The permitting process is confusing. It feels like government is working against us. Every time we get through one permit, they put another one in our way. The application requirements are unclear, and the permitting is taking too long. And when you look at these issues, they're really not confined to just housing within the Natural Resource Ministries. They could be applied to a lot of different project types. But we took this information and we continue to work with these concerns in mind as we develop solutions, not just for housing, but also across the ministries. So these weren't new things that we've heard, but it definitely sort of brought it into focus. So the very first thing that the Premier Eby mandated us to do was to create this Housing Action Task Force. So prior to the Housing Action Task Force, the Natural Resource Ministries were very siloed. We have different legislation, different application types. I'm sure you're all aware of that, different processes and different resourcing to address these various needs. We didn't have a space where we could coordinate together. There was less recognition that permits across the ministries impact each other and also the home builder, and contribute to an overall housing project. It is not that the ministries were not aware that there was interrelationships between the various authorization types, but it was just highly complex and difficult to talk across ministries horizontally about a particular project. So the Housing Action Task Force, we like to call it HAT, brought together 5 ministries that were led by the Ministry of Walrus, and that are commonly involved in housing projects. So of these ministries, we have Environment, Walrus, Forests, and Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. The Ministry of Reconciliation is also part of that conversation because we recognize that they're an important piece, but they're not so much a permitting ministry within the Housing Action Task Force. So this gave us the space to focus on housing as projects with multiple authorizations rather than specific authorization types within a ministry. So as you can imagine, the Ministry of Transportation is very focused on subdivision and rezoning, but they didn't so much think of it as a housing project. It was, maybe this isn't a great example, but they would think of it as sort of an authorization type that they had to work on. So it also highlighted to the various ministries how involved they were in housing projects, and it enabled us to identify and prioritize housing related applications. So I can't emphasize enough how important that was just to be able to look across the ministries and identify which applications are actually related to housing, because none of our application forms asked the client if their application was related to housing. They only completely focused on what application type and the requirements for that application type and being approved or rejected. They didn't talk about, is this related to a housing project? Is it related to any other type of project, really? Some of them are obvious. Housing is not one of the ones that are obvious to the natural resource ministries. So overall, the Housing Action Task Force consists of a leadership team. So those are directors and executive directors across the ministries, and then the resources across the 4 permitting ministries. And I will also emphasize that there's far more than 85 staff across the province that are working on housing, just the way that it works. But 85 was the new FTEs, the new resources that were brought to focus on housing. So the Housing Action Task Force has defined what is housing-related application across the natural resource ministries. This was very important because we needed to have an agreement so that we were dealing with things the same way, identifying the similar priorities across the ministries. And this might be easy for a home builder to say, of course, it's a housing related application. It was not so easy to the ministries. Some of them perhaps are obvious, again, to the ministries, but there's lots that aren't specifically obvious. Sometimes we're not aware that a utility line is key to a housing project, or a water line, or a roadway. Those are things that are sort of ancillary to a housing project that we don't necessarily tie to that project unless someone tells us that it's related to a housing project. So those are kind of key. And also, the Housing Action Task Force developed a prioritization criteria. So this allowed, as you can imagine, there's lots of priorities across the ministries and within housing as well. And so this allowed us to have an agreement across the ministries as to what types of housing or what types of permits would go first, so that we were all working on similar, again, priorities. The Housing Action Task Force also deals sort of with a higher level issue management. We have conversations around things like professional reliance, is one that is very common to most ministries, about how do we do that, and also, what sort of, how do we explain to clients exactly what's needed when they're making an application, and how are those similar and different across the ministries? And we continue to work together to talk about coordination and integration across projects. That has proven to be very complicated. So we're continuing to work on that. And I expect that is going to continue for quite a long time until we resolve various big things. So the second part of what the Premier committed to was this single window service. Again, this sort of addresses the question of, we don't know where to go and we don't know where to start. So the applications for the 4 ministries involved in the housing application service were housed on their own specific ministry sites. So if you needed to understand anything about water, you would go to the Ministry of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship, and even that has changed throughout this process. So that might be something where at the time you would have gone to the Ministry of Forest site, and it's no longer there. Now it's the Ministry of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship, and that could have been confusing. But now it's all on one site, which is called Permit Connect BC. So this is a project-focused site, and right now it focuses just on housing. So this is the one-stop shop. Provincial permits are confusing, and we know it's difficult to know exactly where to go. So it's not like the normal government websites. It's got big pictures and it uses friendly language. It doesn't have everything on here for a housing project, but it is a good start. There's also links to the Ministry of Housing Digital Code build site. And so far we haven't linked to local government processes and permits. We have heard that home builders would like this to be part of the single window approach, and we totally understand that. But so far, we're still, if you excuse the pun, just trying to get our own house in order across the provincial natural resource ministries. And this is the website that also links you to the single housing application service and the housing navigators, which I'll talk about now. So the housing navigators, a common refrain again that we heard through our housing engagement was that we don't know where to start. We don't know what's required. We don't know what the status of existing permits is. All that sort of confusion around what do we do first. So the navigators are part of the single window and single application service. They are the key to coordinating and integrating your home building experiences across the natural resource ministries. They are dedicated resources that will partner with you throughout the permitting process. They will help you to understand what provincial permits you need in a process, and they'll help you to coordinate when those permits are needed and coordinate the process across the various ministries. Some of you will be familiar, of course, with contacts in specific ministries, perhaps that you work with commonly over and over again. But finding the linkages across the ministries and across the permit types early in the process is key to enable us to accelerate your housing project. For example, you may be submitting a preliminary subdivision application with the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, and that involves perhaps developing a bridge across a stream. And this has implications for the Ministry of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship with Water Sustainability Act and riparian area regulations. The earlier we know about this, the earlier we can have conversations across the ministries to streamline the process and reduce duplication and or reduce conflict. So in addition, the housing navigators can be your source for finding information about what the status of your permit is. So they are a real useful resource. And they are linked with the single housing application service. So we're excited to announce today that we've been working on a next version of this form. This is the form that the housing navigators use to coordinate applications across the ministries. Without this form, it's very difficult for us to understand if you've submitted an application to the Ministry of Transportation, how to tie that to an application you may have submitted for Water Sustainability Act. So these navigators are your key to coordinating and accelerating the service. So as a home builder, we're asking for you to reach out and get in touch with the navigators, and they will help you to complete this form if you find it difficult. There may be some concern out there that this is a complicated form. It is not complicated at all. So Sherilyn will be just walking you through it here in a minute. And so this is where we think we have the greatest opportunity to coordinate and accelerate the work across the ministries is for you to help us understand what the scope of your project is, what the location is, so that we can identify what the various authorization types there are and how we might be able to help you figure it out across the ministries. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sherilyn to walk us through this new single housing application service form. Great. I'll say there is an existing one right now, and that was the last screen, and this is the new one and what it would look like.
Great.
Over to you, Sherilyn.
Great, thank you, Megan.
Do you need me to stop sharing?
Yeah, or maybe I can just take right over. Oh, you're right, you do have to stop.
All right. How's that?
Still, almost. There we go. Okay, I'm going to choose this one and hope that you're seeing main menu of Permit Connect services. Yep, great. Okay, so this would be the first page that you'd see after you'd click that register button that Megan was showing on Permit Connect BC. Right now, as she mentioned, it's going to the older version, but this is where we're coming to next. The The first page is about choosing your project type because, as Megan mentioned, right now it's just housing, but in the future we would be able to use this service for additional project types as well. When you click on the housing button, I'm already logged into our test environment here, but what would happen when you click on this is it would first ask you to log in with your BC EID Basic or Business. In September, we'll also be able to support the BC Services card. I'm going to switch to ignore this part for 1 minute. I just want to get in as a proponent as opposed to a navigator, because this behind the scenes, there's a navigator service attached to this, of course. So for now, the 3 options that we have is to either start your new project with the navigator, which is that registering, like you registering to speak with the navigator. We also have an option to submit an inquiry that I'll show you, which is more about general questions or follow-ups on your original submission, and then a place to view. As well as the buttons here, there's also a menu bar to get after the same screens here. And a bit of help if you need to I just want to email that navigator, or I need to report a problem with the system. We have that on the menu bar as well. But first, we'll show you how you would fill out the new form. Basically, we're asking for 4 sets of information to work with the navigator, and that's some basic contact information, a little bit about your housing project and its location, and any permits that you've either already applied for or that you believe you might need, just to give them additional information that you already have to help them get started. So basically, we're looking for the primary contact. Who would you like us to talk to? And this is mandatory information, this first block. Phone call, email, or either as a preferred contact method. There's the ability here to save a draft. So at any time you can fill out as much as you want to, save your draft and come back to it later in case you want to fill in additional information before you actually submit it to the navigator.
Sherilyn, can you talk a little bit about the relationship to the project? What are the choices there, and why are there different choices?
Sorry, which relationship?
Relationship, that one, the owner.
Oh, sorry. Right, just pop them up there. So yeah, is the primary contact the owner, an employee, an agent, a consultant, or other?
And that was just, we're very aware that applications associated with a housing project could come in from various sources. So we knew that that was important to identify whether this is a consultant or whether it's the actual person that is in charge of the development. So we're calling owner right now. You may have better choices of language that you think we should be using rather than that may make more sense to you. And that would be a really good thing to hear as we go through this.
Absolutely. Thanks. Okay. So the other thing that it's asking you for is if it's being developed by a business company or organization. I'm going to say that's a yes, and that you're registered in BC. Then we do have a business name lookup field here from Business Org Book. I'm just going to save the draft for a moment here and go back to show you that under drafts and submissions now, I now have another draft here, which is the same one that I was starting, and I can go back in and finish it now. Under housing, we're basically asking for an identifiable project name and just some free form text about any additional information you want to provide about the project. We will have this ability for you to upload documents about your housing project, which is optional. Anything you think the navigators would help them figure out your roadmap. This functionality isn't available in test yet, but it will be before this goes live. We're asking about single family, multifamily, or other, what type of residential units that you're building and how many, and whether or not it will include rental units, or if you're unsure, that's fine as well. And then again, is it being financially supported by any of the following? If you say yes to any of these, it will ask for a little bit more detail about that. You can also just say no to all up here. There's also ways to navigate down here as well. On the location tab is where we're asking a question about whether it's been affected by natural disaster or not, and whereabouts it's located, either with coordinates or by an address. Either one of these two options, if you...
And I'll just throw in that the reason we're asking whether it's affected by a natural disaster is there may be some prioritization criteria used for that. So for example, there's a lot of work going on in the 2023 fire impacted areas in West Kelowna and also in the Shuswap. So those are important things for us to know if this is if this is a fire impacted or flood impacted property that we might need to accelerate or put higher up in our prioritization. So that was us being proactive really to make sure we captured those.
Right. Thanks for providing that additional context, Megan, when you see that in this demo. So for the address here, when you put it in or the coordinates, the map will zoom in just so you can verify that it is the correct location. There's a plan we're working on for a future release coming up where this map could actually be a bit more interactive and you can do it in reverse. Pin it or draw your polygon on the map and then the coordinates will be filled in for you. So we can have it in either way. You can provide some additional context about the location, either your PIDs, upload some spatial files if you have them, or geomark information, and then just some freeform, anything else you'd like to mention about the location that would help the navigator. At any time while filling out this form, as I said, you could save a draft, but you also might just say, okay, I'm having trouble. I just want to talk to the navigator. At this point, as long as you have at least the primary contact information, you can click Get Assistance and abandon the entry of the form. Just a little usability thing we have there, and that follows the form everywhere. The last tab is about the permits and reports. So if you've applied for any, you can provide that information here. And if you happen to know the tracking number, that's wonderful. And the date that you've last verified the status with the authorization folks for that permit type. It also lets the navigators know that they don't have to tell you need it because you've already applied for it. If you'd like to have the status checked, just say yes or no on that. And then this is about adding permits that you think you might need for whatever reason. And then that'll just help the navigators make sure they look into that. So it's the same list of natural resource transportation permits there. I'm going to submit it now. And it's telling me I've missed some data, so I'm going to go back and fill that in. Doesn't look like any more red ones there. This is an error I'm going to fix. And let's submit that. More. I didn't make a selection there. Okay, so then it will ask you to confirm your submission. And once you, okay. Demos, gotta love demos. Always have an error. Okay, let's assume that it did submit. I'm in the test environment. Maybe perhaps my developers were working in here today. So I've got it. Oh, it did submit. I just got an error on the email, I think. So you can go into your submissions here, under drafts and submissions, like I was showing. Choose that activity number, and you'll be able to re-look at your form here. Had I just done a draft, I showed you that before, you can go into the draft here, delete the draft with this garbage can button here, if you like, and continue to finish it. Okay, so what am I missing? On the submission there, the part that failed was it was supposed to be sending an email. So it would have sent an email to the email address that you provided in the primary contact information, as well as it would have emailed the navigators to let them know the submission had arrived. The other thing that you'd be able to do is choose the submit an inquiry. So this is really just a simplified version of the form. It just has give us some primary contact information. Let us know if it's related to an existing project. If you say yes here, it's going to ask you for that confirmation ID that you would have gotten with the submission and you're in the email, and then a little bit tell us about it. If it's not related to an existing project, then you just can tell us about it, but you can also abandon this inquiry and switch to an actual registration to register with the navigator. If you choose to do that and click this next button, it's going to get mad at me because I did not give it a contact. Like I said, you have to give it at least the contact information. Please help. And I'm going to say that, yes, I'd like to register and click here. And it says now your inquiry will be submitted, but you'll be directed to register. And when you do that, then you're just going back into the first form that I showed you so that you can provide more information than just the simple inquiry. So I believe that has covered the inquiry, the actual registering with the navigator, and switching from an inquiry, as well as going into viewing and editing your drafts and your existing submissions. I should mention that on Megan's screenshot there before, there was a fourth button here about status tracking. So the reason, that we want to do this is we want to get to a point where you can self-serve view the statuses on all the permits associated with your project. So that's where we're going. And I should also mention that the service designers are doing some work to try to understand from various proponents what that status tracker should and could look like. And if anybody's interested in participating in that research, I'm sure you could give your name to Megan and she'll set you up with a conversation with our service designers. As well as the form itself, they are also looking for folks that would like to test it out in terms of usability. How does it work for you? Any suggestions on changes to the flow or the way it works that would make it easier for you.
Yeah.
I think that's it for me, Megan.
Yeah, so again, if anybody would like to participate in, and actually we're really asking you to participate in how this form works, because we want to get it right. And also, if I wanted to find out what the status of my housing project was, what would I like to see? What makes sense to me? Because we know we use a lot of lingo in government that doesn't always make sense to the real world. About things that would like submitted or accepted or things like that. So if you would like to participate in those conversations, please reach out to me via email. My email will be at the end, or you can use the Housing Navigator email as well, is a good one that's also in this slide. And I will send this deck to Jenny to send out to everyone. But yes, we'd really like you to help us. Before we move on, are there any questions about the form that we'd like to ask now while we're in the form?
Actually, there is a question in the Q&A right now. I think through the form, there was a question related to if there are rental units in the project. Someone's asking why is this information being requested?
Oh, good question. Okay, so so the Housing Action Task Force developed some prioritization criteria, as I said, to prioritize housing projects across the province. At the time, we thought, there's probably a lot of housing projects, and we may need to be able to understand which ones we want to deal with first. So at the moment we establish criteria, there may be other criteria we add in the future that we might use to decide what projects to work on first. So the current prioritization matrix is focused on housing projects that are Indigenous led, housing projects that are focused on providing multiple housing units or rental units, because those are ones that we know are badly needed across the province. And also any housing projects over 100 housing units are sort of the top priority at the moment. And then the second priority is any housing projects that are more than 2 and up to 99, I think it is, housing units. And then the priority 3 within housing would be ones that are based on single family homes right now. So again, we're prioritizing those with the most housing types at the moment, providing the most housing units. So hopefully that answers the question. It just helps us to prioritize.
So there's just like a lot of criteria that will determine where your application sits within when you submit it and what's tackled first, sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely.
There is also a question about inspections. Someone's asking, what is the current plan in regards to inspections? Who is inspecting? And is that going to be a part of this process, or will that be entirely separate?
I'm not sure if that is aimed at compliance and enforcement. So compliance and enforcement, are you doing what you've been authorized to do in your permit application? Compliance and enforcement is a separate part of the natural resource ministries. There's no change that I'm aware of that's focused specifically on housing projects. Again, that is quite based on risk of the natural resources in general. So that would be resource stewardship, safety. That is the focus, and there hasn't been a switch to look at projects specifically. So I haven't heard of them specifically focusing on housing. It would be like a Water Sustainability Act authorization, and where does that rank in terms of their prioritization criteria? That makes sense.
Yeah. I have a couple questions related to the new form. Is this new form now launched, or are you still kind of in the phase of developing it? And then I guess a follow-up to that would have just been, is that status tracker going to be a part of this new form launch, or is that kind of a second phase after this new form is already launched? And yeah.
So we're putting the final touches on the form. So it has not been launched in production quite yet, but we are very close to that. Within the next month or so. It's, again, Permitting Solutions Branch will let us know exactly when it's ready, but the developers are doing final touches. Obviously, we found a little bug in test there today, for example. So yeah, we want to iron all that out, as well as we would like to do some usability testing with real users first before we launch. So that's why the request for asks for assistance with that. And yes, the status tracker would be a second. We don't want to hold up releasing this intake form for the status tracker. It will just be, the first step of getting there.
We're running up against a timing crunch at the moment. So as everybody knows, interregnum will start September 21st, I think it is. And so we would have to do any releases before that starts, or everything is held up until the new government is in place. So we are really trying to get testers to test this new single housing application form so that we are able to then say, yes, we've cleaned up the bugs and we're able to release it before September 20th is really what we're aiming to do.
I do have a couple questions that just popped up. Will this be replacing the permit application processes for each individual municipality and jurisdiction? I.e. my project is in New Westminster. Would I be applying for permit through the system instead of the city of New West? I think they're maybe getting confused with the building permit hub, which is separate and deals with the municipal permitting system. This is specifically for the provincial permitting system.
Yeah, it's I know it's very confusing. It's confusing for home builders about where the municipalities their line is versus the provincial government. So the permits that are most often related to the provincial government would be an archaeology assessment, a water sustainability act. I need to fill in a stream. I need to put a bridge across a stream. I'm impacting the riparian area, so I need to apply for riparian area assessment. I'm trying to think what other ones can I off the top. Subdivision application through the Ministry of Transportation. So those are the rural subdivision applications, not the municipal subdivision applications. Again, super confusing. Rezoning requirements, like zoning requirements or a zoning approval through the Ministry of Transportation. Those ones I think most often come in through the municipality, so it's not something the home builder is applying for directly. So that is sort of the scope of the provincial natural resource permits versus a building permit or a development permit through the municipal governments. We completely understand that our authorizations link to municipal processes. There's so many municipalities, and we're finding it quite complex just to get the natural resource ministries to work together to coordinate authorizations within the provincial government, that we haven't reached out to the municipal governments yet to completely integrate with their processes. We've definitely had conversations with some municipal governments that are doing incredible things with speeding up their permitting. And, our intention is to work with them to figure it out so that it does, in the end, look like one process across local and provincial government, but that is a ways down the road. So the answer is you would continue to apply for a building permit through New Westminster. And overall, I'd say the current application processes that we have across the natural resource ministries are the same. We haven't made it so that there's only one application intake yet, even across the natural resource ministries. So our next best thing, if you want to call it that at the moment, is this development of the housing navigator service and this single housing application form that will tell us what you plan to do. And then we can coordinate across the ministries instead of you trying to do that, because we know that that's super confusing.
I guess a follow-up to that would be, I know this is probably not something that you could answer right now, but with the building permit hub and a little bit more integration between the provincial side of things and the municipal side of things, is there potential for kind of like a permit matrix where you can do all your permitting in one kind of, not one window, but maybe one system?
I think the complexity of the process means it's never going to be in one system, but we hope that it will appear to be one system to the proponent. That is our hope, that's what we would like to move towards, is a seamless service for clients so that you don't know how many machines are working in the background, but for you, it looks like it's one service. And again, I say that and people will say I have my rose-colored glasses on. That is quite a ways down the line. We are still trying to just capture the provincial natural resource ministries in one location. And we're very aware that, developers have different needs in how their projects work, and understanding what works the best for developers. Like when does it make sense for you to apply for various authorizations in the process is something we're really interested in understanding more about so that we can do a better job of designing our services for you. So we don't want to create a single application service that doesn't work for clients, and that is very complicated because the housing projects look so different. So I'll stop there. I could go on forever about that.
I get another kind of similar question, but a follow-up is at what point in that process would we be accessing this tool? I think you kind of went into it. If you need like an archaeological impact assessment or water licensing, that kind of thing is when you would access this tool.
I think the sooner you can make contact with the housing navigator and say, I have a housing project, this is where it's located. Maybe I've already submitted an application, or I plan to submit an application. I'm just checking in. do I need any provincial permits? What does that look like? And what am I planning to do? Then that is the point where the navigators can help you through it. We can alert the ministries to say, hey, this is coming. We're going to have to work together on this because we don't want to give the client conflicting information. Also very difficult because we know, again, that various authorizations go in at different times. And so we don't want to mess you up, but we do want to understand what that looks like in order to make sure we're not giving you conflicting information. And I'll say contaminated sites is one that happens quite early on. So you might submit a contaminated site and then you're waiting for 2 years for that to get an approval in principle before you move on. But even understanding what that looks like right up front will help us to understand, who do we need to talk to? Are you going to experience any challenges early on that we might need to tell you about that might impact your housing project going forward? So.
Yeah. One last question here. Someone is asking, so do we pay money for this link or this system? No, the short answer is no.
It's not a form, it's not an application form in the sense that it's a requirement under legislation or anything like that. It is a service that we are providing to help try and coordinate housing projects, because we know it's going to benefit everyone if we can do this better.
Great. And do we need to be submitting an application through this portal for every new project we start?
That in our ideal world, yes. That would be ideal, but if you have any concerns about that, or you're thinking, oh my goodness, I've got too many projects, call the navigators and have the conversation about what makes sense and when, and they can help you to understand. If we know there's no provincial authorizations involved in those projects, it may not be useful, but if we can have a look at some of them and look to see if they're, if you're free and clear and you don't need any provincial permits, then we wouldn't need to monitor or keep track of that or coordinate that. But it's good to have the conversation and then we can make sure.
Yeah, and I will say we have a couple of our members that have used the Housing Navigator service, and they've said they've had nothing but good things to say. Very responsive housing navigators. If you have any questions related to if you need to open up an application or what you need to do, like just give them a call, and they're pretty quick to respond with an answer for you.
Yeah, we'll try and respond in 24 hours, unless it's a weekend.
Someone's asking, as a builder, the single biggest hurdle to housing starts are delays with municipal permitting. How does this alleviate these delays?
It doesn't yet. So municipal permitting is still something that we're not connected yet with municipal permitting, and each municipality is different. Their application process is different. The systems they use are different, which makes it, again, we are very complicated and they are very complicated, and we haven't connected. So it doesn't help with municipal government processes right now, but I'd like to think we are all completely aware that we don't want to be the problem. So everybody is trying to work that way, and just understanding sort of which municipalities perhaps you're having problems with. We can feed that along, but it's not something that we can specifically address. I know the navigators have done an incredible job at trying to understand some of the municipal processes for clients, but we haven't, I think I'm looking at Jen Gibson, but I don't think we've managed to influence municipal governments and their processes yet as a navigator service.
Yeah, not quite yet, Megan. Thanks for that. We've had, I guess, a soft touch in that arena here right now. And as Megan explained, it's quite a complex. But I would say, just to echo what Megan said, reach out early to the navigator service, benefits yourself and ourselves to have further understanding. So get a hold of us early in the process, and we're able to kind of grab a hold of that and go to work on your behalf.
Okay. I think that is the last question, unless something pops up. And I know we only have 10 minutes left. I was there anything that you had to share in terms of like future next steps? I know that one of the things is that you're working on the status tracker, which is kind of going to be like a live dashboard, and there might be some engagement with members on that, at least members that are interested. And then this is, I think, the direction that a lot of municipal governments are going towards too, is having some kind of a live tracker. And I guess, how do we reach out to you for something like that? And what's your timeline on that kind of thing?
The permit status tracker, we are hoping by the end of the year. So before December 31st, I'm looking at Cheryl Lynn, kick me under the desk, like saying something I shouldn't. So that will be, right now, it'll be the navigators that are providing that service in the background. So we still have the challenges that we have, that clients have right now when they call ministries directly and say, what's the status of my permit? We still have that challenge, but the navigators will at least be the ones that are continuing to follow up with the ministries on your behalf to find out the status. So we're hoping that that will go live by December. Again, we're looking for folks to tell us what it is they would like to see. We keep calling it the pizza tracker. For those who have ordered like Domino's pizza, we think that's what developers would rather see. They don't want to know that their application has been accepted. They want to know how long before they get a pizza at the end of it. We're not going to be at that state because we haven't got a handle on the timelines for our permits. We're getting much better. We have really reduced the turnaround time for housing related permits, like incredibly, across the ministries, because we have prioritized housing related permits, but we won't be at the point where we'll be able to say, and the end of your, time frame will be 205 days. But we're working towards that. That's where we're hoping to get to. So by the end of the year, we will have a simple status tracker that will be able to say something like accepted, this is where it is, etc. And you can always call the navigators for that information. We're working on a transformation process that we're talking about integrating more our processes across ministries. So as I said, right now, our processes are very siloed. You have an intake here, then it happens here, and you have that like multiple times, depending on how many applications you have. And we are working with ministries to move towards that single application experience. We keep calling it because we know not everybody needs a single application. So that is something we're working on. We don't have a time frame for that. The next piece is analyzing what that might look like in the future. We're also working on a legislative package, and the time frame for that is the fall of 2025. So we hope to have that drafted out by the spring of 2025. So that will focus on strategically speeding up permitting. So what we're trying to do is we have this, we're trying to eliminate applications. Like, where can we get rid of applications that we don't need to make decisions on in order to speed up the process? And so that is the focus of the legislative package. I'm trying to think what's in there specifically. I could talk, there's, I hope I get the right section. Section 10, I think it is, of the Water Sustainability Act. When you're digging out the foundation of a house and it fills with water, you need to make an application to get rid of the water so that you can continue to build. And so it's called a Section 10 application. I'm looking at Jen Gibson to correct me if I got that wrong.
That's right.
Oh, good. And then, so that's one that we're saying, if you're building houses, we don't need you to apply for an authorization to remove water that's filtered into the foundation of your house or whatever it is. And there's a few others like that. So that is by next year, we're hoping to make some of those bigger changes to legislation, again, to accelerate permitting for housing. And we are hoping by this fall, or I'm going to say the spring, to pilot something with local government, a single process with local government. So we are trying to figure out which, who are the local governments that would be interested in working with us to figure that out. And there's a number of them that we've been talking to that are really far along in their processes and how it works. And we think we might be able to sort of understand better how that works. So those are the big things that are coming next from our standpoint. So I'll stop there.
Sounds like a lot of exciting things. And as always, like if there's ever an opportunity for our members to get engaged with feedback, I know we've been talking a little bit about that engagement for the status tracker. Please let me know. And I guess if there's any follow-up questions after this webinar today, you can always send them my way, jenny@chbabc.org, and I can coordinate with Megan's team so that we can get those answers to you. I think other than that, thank you, Megan and Sherilyn and Jennifer and Sebastian for being here and presenting and doing the live demo. And thank you everyone for joining us. And with that, I'll conclude the webinar and wish everyone a great rest of the day.
Thanks so much, Jenny. I'll send you the slide deck too, so you can send it out.
Thanks so much, Megan. Thanks, Sherilyn.
Jenny.